Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining our webinar today. We're excited to share the fascinating research compiled by several of our GoSecure security research team members on social media manipulation. Before we get started, just a reminder that we are recording this webinar and will make it available via email to all registrants and attendees. At the end of the presentation, time permitting, we will open it up to Q&A. You can submit questions using the Questions tab in the webinar panel at any point during the presentation. With that said, let's get started. Over to you, Masara.
Hello, everybody. Thank you for taking the time to be here today. Let's dig right into the content just because we have loads of things to talk about. Okay, so back in 2015 and 2016, Olivier used to work at ESET, where he had studied a malware called Linux Moose that was infecting devices to use them as proxies to go on social networks. And then he moved on to work at GoSecure, where I started an internship, and we were looking for a new project to do with MyTax, a nonprofit organization doing research in Canada, and the University of Montreal with David Descarriers. And this is at that time where ESET shared to us a second version of the malware that we thought that it'd be interesting to look at the Linux Moose botnet, but not the first version, the second version. So first to start, Linux Moose, why do we say Linux Moose? Because we're going to say that throughout the whole presentation. Well, that comes back when Olivier and Thomas from ESET studied the malware, and they found in the binaries the word élan. And élan means moose in French, and just because they were from Canada and they needed to name that new malware, they decided to give it a Canadian touch by calling it Linux Moose. However, we really don't believe that these people are somehow, or we actually don't know, related to Canada. It's rather just based on the researchers. So Linux Moose is an IoT botnet that conducts social media manipulation. What we mean by social media manipulation is basically the creation of fake likes and follows through fake accounts. So a bot connects to an IoT device, goes to a social network, creates a fake account, and then uses that fake account to go like and follow other people to create fake visibility. To give you a good example of social media manipulation, there's a very good story of a journalist in Montreal that started an investigation where she became an influencer while cheating. So what she did is she created that fake account profile you can see to the right called the Pretty Runner. That fake account was based on a girl who was just running, posting pictures of her running. And what she did is she bought fake followers and then used various techniques to be able to grow her visibility online. And within 6 months, she was offered to be representative of a company for the Montreal Marathon, and she was given gifts by companies just to take over her account and start posting things with brand names. That's interesting because it's just a very good example of how you can become an influencer and make money out of advertising while having cheated, right? So although there's many techniques to be able to sort of create fake likes and follows, we're focusing on one kind, which is buying fake likes and follows. So you can use pods or follow-on-follow methods, but we're really focusing for this presentation on the buying of fake followers online. And this presentation basically is about the ecosystem of social media manipulation. It's based on a 4-year-long investigation that started in 2016 when I was a research intern. And we used various investigative techniques. So from reverse engineering, some part of software that we're going to talk about, to traffic analysis and even investigations of forums. So we really sort of use various methods to be able to map all of the actors that are involved, starting from the IoT botnet all the way up to, you know, the journalists wearing fake likes and follows. So let's start with the Linux Moose botnet, and I'll hand over the microphone to Olivier.
Hi. So yeah, the botnet itself, Masara did already an introduction of it, but here is what we decided to depict the malware, and we'll place it into a larger ecosystem, which consists of the social network on top, and then on the grass on the ground, the botnet itself. And you'll see as we go on, like the various actors will be mapped into that portrait that we have here. So Linux Moose, in a nutshell, it affects routers and Internet of Things devices. But what we mean by that is specifically an embedded Linux system with a BusyBox userland. So the BusyBox userland is the way the infection is triggered. So it needs that. It has a worm-like behavior, so it's spread on its own automatically. By doing telnet credential brute force, it has a list of 300 or so username and password combination, and it doesn't do any exploitation. It's really focused on brute force. The main payload, so it's active, useful payload, is a proxy service, very custom-made proxy service that supports both SOCKS, v4, v5, HTTP, and HTTPS. In order to catch it, we deployed honeypots that combined a low interaction honeypot and a full interaction honeypot. I'm not going to go into the details of this architecture because we already presented about it before, and the presentations are available on YouTube and so on. If you would like to have an overview of that architecture, we would happily share links after the fact of how we built them. We deployed several of them all over the world. And turns out that it didn't give us any difference. But from my experience, malware used to be really localized, like Brazil threats are very different than the rest of the world. Same with China, Russia, etc. But from Linux Moose's perspective, geographic location didn't change anything on how the bots were used or the payload were used. In order to be able to do this research, we needed to have access to the plain text traffic, but the social network traffic that was proxied through was protected by HTTPS. As we know, Instagram and Facebook and Google, they all migrated to HTTPS a few years back because of the important problems that were disclosed around, and it kind of, for those who remember, Firesheep was a tool, and also the NSA looking was another reason why everything basically moved to HTTPS. So the botnet uses HTTPS or proxy traffic that is HTTPS, but we still decided to try to break the HTTPS by using a man-in-the-middle attack. We used the man-in-the-middle proxy tool to do so. And so what you see here in the lightish purple is that from the proxy client perspective, they would get certificate errors if they watched them. But our experience looking at the large-scale malware, we knew that they would get so much error based on so many different circumstances. For example, if a security appliance was inline into the network where the infected device was operating, they would get cert errors. So they probably ignored them. And this bet paid off, because what happened is we got access to the traffic, the raw traffic. So basically, we had machine parsable logs that enable us to see what username were, the content of the get and the post command with the social networks, mostly Instagram. And so since we have access to the content, we know potentially who's following who is, what accounts are being created. So then, Masara, and we'll see this in a later section, but we'll go into the details of why I say potentially who's following who, because we needed to assess, like, is this a buyer or not? We had access to the real technical traffic, but we couldn't say for sure, like, is this following of Beyonce really malicious and Beyonce is paying for this or not? And you'll see that later. But for now, what did we have? We have several infected hosts used by operators. We have access to the HTTPS traffic in plain text, and we also see the command and control traffic, and we know there is a publicly available seller market. And so this transitions us into our next section.
Yeah, so basically, from this sort of part of the research, we presented at Black Hat Europe in 2016, and we published one white paper and one scientific paper based on the data that we had recovered from the honeypots. We're not going to go into the details of exactly what we found, just because it's available online, but we wanted you to know that you can go see that presentation as well. Sorry, sometimes it's lagging when I'm trying to switch the slides. So what was even more interesting that we hadn't yet investigated was the whitelisted IPs. So basically, okay, we had HTTPS traffic in plain text, and we also had the PCAPs traffic, right? But from the infrastructure of the .NET, one thing that we hadn't investigated yet was the fact that 7 whitelisted IPs, so 7 servers, had the right to send requests through the infrastructure. So when I say whitelisted IPs, I basically just mean a server somewhere who, like, that had the right to actually send requests through the whole botnet of infected devices. So what interested us is that we thought, well, if there's 7 servers that are allowed to use the botnet and push requests, then potentially we could have a reseller model. So what we mean by that is that one server would be focusing on Twitter creations of fake likes and follows and would be selling Twitter fake likes and follows, while another one would be doing Instagram, for example. But for us to be able to actually try to test that hypothesis and see whether or not the servers were based on a reseller model, we had to sort of do some traffic analysis. So it took us a long time to end up understanding what was the meant of these servers. We did traffic analysis using the Jupyter Lab tool, which is very useful to be able to sort of correlate data and data frames and plot it. We had various variables from the PCAPs and the HTTPS traffic in plain text. So we investigated honeypots use, TLS fingerprints, user agents. So all sorts of variables in which we could try to see if the whitelisted IPs had different behaviors that would allow us to sort of ping the behavior to, for example, Twitter reseller or Instagram reseller. But what we ended up finding was something that was quite different. So the 2 variables that were really significant were accounts created on social networks and accounts followed on social networks. So what we mean by that is that for each whitelisted IP, there was a list of specific fake account related to that whitelisted IP, and then they all went to follow the same potential buyers. So we couldn't say one server was actually a reseller, because they were all following the same people. What was specific to each server was instead a list of fake accounts. And that's sort of when we sort of were able to confirm or conclude that these whitelisted IPs were used for fake account management. And it sort of makes sense, right? If you have to have 100,000 fake accounts, then you have to pin your fake accounts to the same IP of the infected devices, so your fake account do not connect within the same minutes to a device in Russia and one in the United States, because otherwise it would be flagged right away as potential malicious or potential botnet by Instagram or any other social network. So we sort of concluded that was for fake account management. So at that time, where did we stand, right? Well, we knew that each whitelisted IP addresses had their own list of fake accounts. So we knew that that was their aim, right? We also knew from investigating and talking to other people that these whitelisted IPs were running on Windows servers, and they were also having a remote desktop protocol being actively used. So that made us think, right? What kind of software would be running on Windows and would be allowing any individual to connect to the Windows servers through RDP, and allowing you to sort of manage your list of fake accounts. And this is when we sort of discovered a new actor in the ecosystem that Olivier's going to talk about.
Yep. So here we are in the section about automation software. So let's position it in the bigger picture. So we're going to put it in the middle, right beside the Linux Moose, but close to it because it interacts with it. Masara, can you?
Yeah, sorry, it's sort of lagging.
I think it's high-res pictures are maybe taking a lot of bandwidth.
Okay, so that's where we're placing it. Then I'll move on.
Yeah. No, it's okay. All right. So basically, the automation software enables, as she was saying, so it's basically a grid layout where you have all your accounts, Instagram accounts that you created, managed in there. And so you see it like an Excel spreadsheet where you have username and passwords and a proxy to use. And so this enables you to automate the interactions on social network of several hundreds up to thousands of accounts. And so we knew that Linux Moose needed that piece of infrastructure in order to do what we were monitoring that they were doing. And so this is why we started the hunt, like going back and try to find, okay, who's providing such software? Is it available on the public internet, etc. So we were looking specifically, when we started looking, we were looking specifically for the Linux Moose provider. So we had user agents that we could try to match, and we knew they were both mobile and desktop. And we knew Linux Moose was using, although the proxy was generic and offering various protocols, they were always using the SOX proxy, SOX v4 variant. Next up.
Yes, I'm trying. Okay.
You might need to talk actually before you could click.
I think I need to have my microphone on to be able to switch the slides. Sorry about
possible. So what happens is, by looking at it, we found different sets of features. So managing thousands of accounts, different proxy type per account user agent, so which we found is pretty clever. So if you're Instagram and you try to prevent fraud, you will use whatever means is necessary to ensure that created accounts are mapped to a specific IP or a specific phone, and that if this roams around too much, then you flag them as being malicious, right? No one uses 7 different phones to go on their Instagram. Well, no, not no one, but you know, a few of us, very few of us statistically could do that. And so this is part of the arms race between social networks and fraudsters. And so they were you could see that reflect in the features of the automation software. We found also different business models. So some had unlimited account support, others were, and you pay a one-time fee. Others were more on a pay-per-month type. Other were on the paper account. And because Instagram changes often, like some of the software that we're going to show you today, they have basically releases every month, so that they implement new countermeasure to bypass some of the Instagram countermeasures, you know, arms race stuff. Yep, next up. So we'll start with Gram Dominator. So Gram Dominator has a set of feature like proxy support and run on several Instagram accounts at the same time. This is why we got interested into it. This is the first one that we looked at, that we reverse engineer. It's written in .NET, and it's not it's one of the few that is not packed. So you can see that for user agent strings, it has a device generator, and if you click on the next up, you see that the device generator supports Android version, release, DPI, resolution, manufacturer, brand, model, device, CPU. So all different object that builds the user agent on a mobile phone. And this is what Instagram uses for inside their own Android application. If you look at this, so I loaded the DLL with .NET and triggered it. And so this is the kind of user agent that it will generate. This was done a while ago. So the Instagram version, I think now is in the 70s, but you can see that you get like very phone-looking user agents from this code. And this is dynamic, so you can basically have as much as you want. So it's gonna be hard to block. Social Dominator here's the screenshot of the whole view, but if we click another time, yes. So here's a zoom on the account details. So you see now that we just have one account, but the way these things are operated is that you add several accounts in there. So username, the password is in there, and the proxy address, and you see the friendship count. If you click, you see other features like importing multiple account, exporting data. So a lot of stuff is based on scale, you know, automating scale. Next. And you have a log on the below. So whenever you start getting error, they can react, you know, okay, this IP or this proxy has been burned. I'm detected as doing something malicious. I receive error messages. So let's move on. Let's use something else. You are able to, well, the bad guys are able to react like that. Another one that we're going to look at is follow liker. So you see a nice splash screen. Follow liker is different in the sense that it had a launcher. So if you use the application directly, you would get an error because your Java runtime is kind of out of date. The evaluation is over, right? So if you look inside the binary, you realize that the evaluation is 3 months, has a 3 months evaluation, and based on the dates of the binary, it was expired. So I was like, how come when I use the launcher, I can use the application? So it turns out that the guys who created that piece of software, they included something that bypasses the evaluation version. So the launcher basically contained in a UPX packed fashion inside its own exe the run as date program, and so it would launch the process of the follow liker software with the evaluation version in a date where it would be okay for it to run the evaluation version. So it's a pretty convoluted scheme, but this is also that the Java runtime that they use is one where they compile the Java code into C, native code, and C and C++. So it's really difficult to reverse engineer. You're basically reverse engineering the Java ecosystem, all of it at the same time. There's no way to link back to the original source code. So this means that they really well protected their, malicious or shady, at least, automation software. So this story was something that we wanted to share because you see that there is a level of sophistication unseen in other industries. The binary, the AXE, and this is what you have in the end. It's a grid layout, same simple application. When opened into IDA Pro, the main binary of the application gave a 267 megabytes of code to analyze. So it's very, very tedious amount of work, right? Yeah, next up. So we looked at all of these, and in that presentation, in order to stay in time, we didn't mention many of them. But this table serves as a summary where you have the architecture of how it works, the browser, the embedded browser that they uses, if it was packed or not. So you can see that almost all of them were packed except one. And was it our target? So unfortunately, just to go quickly through that slide, we didn't find the one exactly that had 100% match with Linux Moose. And so it could have been completely custom, or it could have been one that we haven't found yet. But because of the fact that they are heavily packed, the progress of analyzing these and trying to match it with our traffic has been really hindered here. Next up, so where do we stand now? So we found several automation software vendors. So we could think of a way of creating or kind of vertically integrate the fact that I have requests and I have the software to manage my fake accounts, and I use the botnet in order to perform my fake likes and follows online. But so what we know now is that the reseller model is not at the botnet level. So before these 7 IP addresses of the whitelisted IP, there is something where there is a reseller model going on, or at least that was the hypothesis. Now we moved, our attention to somewhere else. And so Masara is gonna discuss where she found actually that reseller model.
Yes, so while I investigated the decrypted traffic that we were talking about with the honeypots, I was looking, for the vendors. I was looking at the profiles that were being liked and follows, and I wanted to find, a profile on Instagram that would say, hey, boy likes and follows, and then end up saying, well, Linux Moose has an end customer seller, here's the website. But while investigating this, what I found was rather something more interesting. I found on Instagram accounts that were being followed by the botnet, there was advertising of reseller panels of social media fraud. So basically, this is when we sort of discovered a whole bunch of new actors called reseller panels. So what they do is they resell fake likes and follows in bulks. So when I was talking to the journalist and she was telling me that she paid a large amount of money for 10,000 followers for her account on Instagram, and I told her about these reseller panels, she was kind of surprised because she could have saved much more money by going directly to the bulk reseller rather than going to the end customer seller. Sorry. So where do these reseller panels sort of are settled in the ecosystem, where they're a little bit above the automation software next to Linux Moose, but they're still in the tree and closer to the social media, right? So reseller panels look like that. So basically, you can easily log in with a username and a password. They're not actually verifying any of your emails, so it's easy to sort of make something up and just go and see how the panel works. They all offer loads of services from, followers on Instagram, on Twitter, on Vine, and on all of that. What's even more interesting is the cheaper you try to go. So for example, I wanted to buy 1 million followers, but at a very cheap price, and the shittier the payment processes become. So the cheaper you go, and the more likely you're going to have to pay in cryptocurrencies or via, sending money to friends and family on PayPal to somebody you don't really know. What was even more interesting about these reseller panel was that they all looked alike. So they sold popularity in bulk, but they also, all their features, the way that they were sort of built, were really similar. So at that time, we did a simple investigation because we thought maybe a single actor is behind all these panels, right? So we gathered information on reseller panels and then had a sample of about 343 of them. And we did a simple analysis. We fingerprint the web application, we gathered information on domain registration information, HTML content, and IP address. And the idea here was basically to just cluster this and see the extent to which they were similar. But what was even more interesting is that we found that the IP address we found that 66% of the panels that we had investigated were hosted on the same IP address. So all this investigation was useful, but the most relevant finding was the fact that they were all hosted mainly on the same IP address. So we did just simple passive DNS lookup on the IP, and what we found is that about 1,000 other domains were hosted on that IP, and they were all related to social media fraud. So for example, you see grampanel.com, followers.com, panelmaismedia.com. So all of them, when you visit them, you find out that they're reseller panels of social media fraud. Because I'm very picky, I wanted to visit many of them just to be sure that the person behind these panels was not involved in anything else. And I ended up finding a very interesting site called perfectpanel.com. What perfectpanel.com does is it is a panel as a service provider. So it makes sense, right? You have an IP address hosting about 1,000 reseller panels, and then you find a panel as a service provider. So somebody who sells these panels and even provides hosting for you. So if you just want to jump in the business, you can. You just have to rent a panel, the software is going to be provided to you, and then you find new customers. And that sort of yielded a new actor in the industry, which we called panel as a service, and depicted as a wolf behind the reseller panels here, so sort of enabling them to exist. And they stand here in the ecosystem. So basically, panel as a service, we found about 3 to 4 of them. They provide all-in-one solutions, so ready-to-go software. Some of them provide hosting and even domain names, so you don't even have to buy yours, they'll buy it for you. And most of them have features such as API to receive orders, API to send orders, or you can also track your workers. So what you could do is simply link your panel to another reseller panel to receive the orders, and then send them to another API and just sort of act as a middleman in the whole process. If you're more of a manual person and you have a click farm or you have several workers working for you making fake accounts manually, then you can have like all of them log into your panel and you can track their work manually. Here I give you an example of one of the panel as a service provider who had called IndusRabbit. So you can see here the sort of dashboard and how you can have different user ID, name, email. So those were all the users active on it was a demo of the panel. And even more interesting is that you can even select an API to connect your orders. So you wouldn't have to have direct contact with the Linux Moose operators. You would only need to connect to another reseller panel and act as middleman, making your business in the middle, the few cents that you're making out of each followers from the purchase to the selling. That sort of made us wonder though, like, how are these connected to Linux Moose, right? So we know that many of them are just connecting to each other, but who's connected to the main provider like Linux Moose, right? So we investigated forums, and mainly Black Hat World, because this is one of the main forums where CEO and social media fraud is being discussed. Here I give you an example of somebody who's looking for the main provider. So the person says, mostly all panels use the same provider. The only difference is price. If anyone knows this provider, he is welcome to contact me privately. So you see here that you had somebody who sort of has a bulk reseller panel, but would like to connect directly to the main provider, sort of cutting the different middlemen in between. And then somebody responds, and these are just screenshots, like lots of discussions are being available on Black Hat World. You can just write reseller panel, social media manipulation, or social media marketing, as they call it, and you'll find them. Here you have someone say, no one will reveal the main provider. For them, he is their hidden ghost. And an even more striking statement is made by SMM Snab, who says, guys, unless you're spending $1,000 a day on SMM panels, you don't need to search for the original supplier. A, he wouldn't be interested in your volumes, and B, you just need to find the most reliable reseller for the most cheap resellers and get it on with it. That would be enough. In this market, you have to put your efforts not in buying cheaper, but in selling more. And it sort of makes sense that the operators of Linux Moose are probably just dealing with a few individual or reseller panels who are sort of shielding them from all of the others that are involved in the business. So here, we really see that the operators are very sort of well kept from all of these actors. They're sort of hidden below. But this sort of made us wonder, right? So there's another guy who said that there cannot be one provider. There's several. And it makes sense, right? Linux Most wouldn't be able to provide for all of these panels. So we thought maybe there's another way to sort of create fake likes and follows without going through a botnet or infected devices. And this is when we sort of found a new actor, which we're going to present in a second. But first, we like to do a recap so you sort of follow us through. So where do we stand from, this whole investigation? Well, we know that there's a system of reseller and panel as a service providers that I just presented, right? We also know that we have automation software to create and orchestrate fake accounts. So how can you create and orchestrate fake accounts automatically using automation software if you don't have an IoT botnet? And this is where I'll hand the microphone to Olivier.
So basically what happens is you're getting blocked, right? After creating, let's say, 100 fake accounts from the same IP address, eventually Instagram is gonna block you. It's gonna say this behavior is not acceptable, and it could be 100, it could be 1,000, it could vary a lot based on your ISP. So they, this is their magic sauce, and if you would know exactly how it worked, then you would know how to circumvent it. But ultimately they're getting blocked. And so this is when I started looking, okay, let's try to see what could work around blocks that would be legal, quote unquote, available from Google searching, right? And so I've heard about this thing that I never did before called residential proxies. So residential proxies is a proxy service that you rent. Think of it like a VPN, but using a simpler protocol. That guarantees you that you will have residential IP addresses, not data center IP address. The reason why I make a distinction between the two is because from a social network standpoint, it's a lot easier to block whole subnets of data center proxies, data center IP addresses, because you kind of can assume that if there is traffic, you're not really you're not gonna piss off famous users, because this traffic will usually not go out through these IP address. So they might wait until there is fraud, but once there is fraud from a specific, let's say, Amazon AWS IP, instead of blocking the specific IP, they could block the whole /24. And so this is why the residential service exists. And so basically there is we like to screenshot Black Hat World, but there is this next gen LEDs junior VIP who said at the beginning of the year last year, stop using data center proxies. So if we move along, so this means that there is a new actor that enters the game, and that it is completely complementary or a replacement of a botnet, right? So the botnet before was used as a proxy service, and now you can purchase proxy service using your credit card or Bitcoins. Now let's look at it and their pricing and how they work, because we try to understand. Our hypothesis was, are these built on compromised infrastructure, or do they run on legitimate infrastructure? So in our map, we placed it, on the ground as an alternative to the Linux Most botnet. So the tree is at the middle, and you can go either, you find a botnet operator and you send them traffic, or you use residential proxy IP. And in either cases, you need your automation software at the middle to automate the interaction, of your social media accounts. Moving on. So we purchased from several of them. So High proxies, Storm proxies, RSOX, Vala solution. Vala solution is a bit different than the other. First, the website is very glorious, but it also offered a lot of stuff related to Instagram. So we're gonna dig into the specific product that we purchased for this research. So you see here, there is several proxies for social network, and the one we got, you can click, Masara, is the Comet static proxies residential IPv6. So this one is different than the other. We have IPv6 address, and it works a bit differently, as you'll see soon. But Valar is very, less professional, more, weird, and Game of Thrones reference. So yeah, it's a special one, and it's very cheap too. We also looked at Luminati, and what we're gonna do for Luminati, do we have another slide before the video? Yeah. So Luminati, the reason we put in here, it's a little bit different because it says how it operates. So we could discard it from the our hypothesis, is it compromised or not? But the business model is very shocking. So we're gonna show a short video about how they do it. But what you need to understand first is that they, and the use case that they put on their website, they acknowledge the fact that you can use this for social media account management. So it's part of their proposition.
Grow your app revenue without hurting its user experience by joining Luminati's developer community. Embed our SDK and earn $5,000 per month for every 100,000 of your daily active users. Luminati is the world-leading peer-to-peer business proxy network. We help Fortune 500 companies collect web data through residential IPs, so they're never blocked or misled. We do that by partnering with app developers and inviting their users to be peers in our network. When users download or upgrade your app, they will see this screen, allowing them to join our network and get your app for free. You can offer your users other options, like watching ads or purchasing your app. Users who choose to be peers would not feel any change, as their device resources will be shared only when their phone is idle, connected to internet, and has enough power, allowing you to earn money from your inactive users. Implementing our SDK is quick and easy. Grow your revenues while increasing your app usage and retention. Join Luminati's developer community today.
Oh, yeah, as you can see, this is a very shocking business model, and this is why we included this here. It's because I'm like fascinated by the fact that it could be legal. But again, as we scoped our research, this was clearly not compromised, just shady practices, and so we didn't study this one specifically. There is a good study by Trend Micro about Hula VPN, which is the front end of Luminati that you can look at if you're interested. Very interesting paper. So for Storm proxies, we received IPs from the US. The IPs, they had conflicting information. So the Whois database disagreed with the GeoIP database, and so the ISP colon in particular. And so this, I think, is the confusion why it could be considered residential IP, because it's an ISP in Chile that is in the database. But when you look at the GeoIP, you have a host 1+, which is clearly a hosting provider listed in there. And the trace route leads to the US in all cases. So the there's something, you know, wrong, and this is probably why they can get away with it. Next up. When we started doing scans for services that they were providing, we were able to identify that they were providing a Squid HTTP proxy. They didn't protected scans from localhost, and it was a Linux system. And because of version fingerprinting, we are able to say that it is Debian Jessie that is running. Due to the way Debian backports security fixes, they will never increase version numbers because they backport all the security fixes. So for us, Storm Proxies was clearly a system administrator operation and not running on compromised infrastructure. They provided us several IPs, so we were able to correlate that it was also consistent across IPs. Our SUCs, we received the IPs all from the same subnet, so it's pretty similar as the previous player. It was using admin LLC, and if you Google it, it was unclear if it was a data center or ISP. And so again, you know, using conflicting information in IP databases, traceroute confirms that it's going to Russia. So I wonder how long it will take before stuff like that will be blocked by social networks. But it worked for the time we tried. Next up. It exposed SSH on 3389, didn't protect scans from localhost. We were, although, unable to fingerprint the proxy service, but because of the SSH banner that was exposed once we used the proxy, we knew that it is Debian Jessie, the Deb 8U7, so update 7 doesn't lie here. Next up. So Valar solution, this was the only one that operated as a tunnel, meaning you get an IPv4 IP that was in France, but the traffic would go out as an IPv6 address in the US. The IPv4 was data center, and the IPv6 was AT&T Internet Services. There's no dashboard, so I put in the web page here again because it's, you know, magnificent. And also the GeoIP lands in the middle of a lake. This is something that we heard afterwards, after our Black Hat presentation, talking with people, is that they started doing so to avoid people shipping stuff to, you know, fake addresses or whatnot. And so it's just a side story that is interesting. Moving on. Valar uses tree proxy. So tree proxy, which we correlated by nmap and able to confirm strings in the source code. Tree proxy is a Russian-based open source generic proxy that supports a lot of protocols. I saw it in the past used by malicious operations, but it could be used by legitimate, you know, actors too. They protected localhost scans, so the only one to do so. And IPv6 was sealed from outside, so no way I could scan either through the tunnel or outside of the tunnel the IPv6 address. And the proxy's entry point was Debian 9 because we were able to fingerprint Nginx version and OpenSSH version. So Valar was clearly the shadier of the lot, but still it looked like more of a system administrator work rather than compromised infrastructure. So here, let's skip that table because we're short on time. But this is for reference if you're interested in understanding more residential proxy providers and the work that we've done. I'll be more than willing to answer any questions later. So there is also a good paper done by University of it's written at Tsinghua University, where they studied extensively residential IP proxy as a dark service. But the difference with our research is that they had access to traffic that was proxied. So they had collaboration with ISPs that were part of a proxy service. And so this is a very different angle than us, where we try to assess, is it compromised infrastructure or not? Worth a read. So where do we stand now? We have either an IoT botnet or residential proxy services. One is free, but you need to operate it. The other has cost, fixed cost. We have automation software, which is, again, you know, using a cost model. So another actor, another one that needs to have its share. Then we have reseller panels and panel as a service providers that are fueling to the automation software. So what are we missing here? who buys from the reseller panel. So let's get closer to the social network and to the end customer, that which we called it. So Masara?
Yes, okay. So, well, that's customer-facing sellers. That's how we call them. So basically, where do they stand in the tree? Just a little bit above, closer to the social networks again, and closer to the buyers that we're going to present later. So basically, end customer sellers are just, sellers that sell directly to buyers. And then, they have very well, nicely sort of created websites that makes the whole operation looks legitimate. So here I give you an example of Devumi, which was advertising for gain follower, viewers, and likes by buying them, right, instead of trying to grow organically. And Devumi has a very interesting stories because it got some sort of a legal problem with some of their partners within the firm, and they ended up having to publish their buyers list. And the New York Times took that buyers list and made a whole investigation out of this called the Follower Factory. It's a very good investigation if you have time to go and read about it. But what they did is they sort of showed that Devumi was selling fake likes and follows and sort of shamed the people who were the buyers, so who had actually bought fake likes and follows. Lots of very big stars in the United States were included in that investigation. Following that investigation, the New York Attorney General, Letitia James at the time, sort of announced a groundbreaking settlement where they said that sellers of fake followers and likes on social media was illegal deception. And they fined Devumi $50,000, which was not a lot because according to the New York investigation, they made a few $1,000,000 per year. But still within that state, they sort of established that this practice was illegal. What happened following this investigation was that Devumi closed down. But as you can see, they actually are pointing towards their best alternatives. So socialboss.org, instagrowing.net, and youtubegrow.com. So the practice is still not yet done, or like it's still growing and flourishing in other states. And lastly, buyers, right? Let's not forget them because they're the ones who are sort of driving this whole ego market. And how did we end up being able to study buyers? Well, first, let's just say that they stand above the tree, right? Really close to the social networks and the end customer sellers because that's whom they are actually making deals with. So how did we sort of were able to study potential buyers? Well, we looked at the traffic that was being proxied by Linux Moose, and 86% was going to Instagram. So what we did is we developed a methodology to sort of create a list of potential customers, accounting for about 500 accounts that we could say were most likely customers because they were followed many times by the botnet, they had low engagement on the profile and all that. And we did a content analysis, which basically means just like looking at each account and trying to categorize in which larger category of kinds of customers this account would be included in. And basically what we found is that 20% of our sample was entertainment industry. So basically guys like him just trying to sort of be successful in singing, or this person who's a reality personality actor, global jet setter. So what's interesting is when you go to their profiles and you click on the YouTube links, there is one has near 31,000 followers but had like 100 views on YouTube. So there's some sort of a mismatch in between the views on YouTube and the followers on Instagram. We also found that 21% of our sample was selling products and services. So basically watches, pens, jewelry, like all sorts of products and services where you're not sure if they actually have a base, like a shop you could walk into, like a physical shop, but they actually sell online through, a web service. And what's interesting too is that most of these accounts were luxury all the time, so probably fits with the Instagram social network. And then sadly for, I guess, our society, 26%, so a quarter of our sample was personal profiles. So just people posting about themselves in cars, posting their food, or showing that they're chilling out in boats. I really find that there's interesting psychological research to do here, just because if you're somebody who's not aiming at being popular, but you're buying fake likes and follows and posting pictures of yourself online, well, there's some sort of a cognitive dissonance here, just because you're posting it to people who are false, so why are you still doing it? But that's a whole other kind of research that we're not going to go in today. And then the rest of the sort of sample was things that I could not exactly categorize. So here I'm just like putting a few highlights. So the unexpected ones Well, we found a military general from the Special Forces of Iraq, and we confirmed that this actual profile was not a copycat. It was actually him. So we thought it was quite interesting. We also found lots of witches, lots of sorcerers or psychics. So here we had a woman from New York who said that she was a reading psychic, spiritual magic, and she called herself a home witch. So like browsing through Instagram made me discover lots of lots of services and types of people that didn't know existed or that I wasn't aware of, I guess. And then lastly, the fascinating ones, well, we found obviously a testing, like STD testing account, and this sort of made sense. Like it doesn't have lots of followers, but if you're in charge of marketing for that company, maybe buying followers is your best solution, because who's going to go and follow an STD account, right? An account selling STD services testing. And we also found dogs with more money than you. So just to remind you that there's dogs with more money than you, but it's just interesting because this gives you sort of an idea of all the things I went through and how it was sometimes difficult to sort of categorize things because it's just odd. So I'm just going to go a little bit quicker because we're almost out of time, but we're actually past time. Okay, we made an experiment. So what we did is we knew that Linux most targeted social networks were Flipagram, Kiwi, Periscope, Twitter, and Instagram, and we found an end customer seller selling these services. So we decided to buy from that account. So what we did is we created a fake account called BeautifulBird33 and bought 6,000 followers from the seller I told you was selling the exact same services as Linux Moves. And I complained a lot to the provider, so we ended up with 8,000 followers. And this was because what we wanted to do at that time was to see the account going through our honeypots that we had that were actively running the botnet at the time. And lucky for us, it actually did. So the fake account that we created, on which we bought the 8,000 fake followers, it actually went through our honeypots. So this sort of confirmed part of the chain that we had investigated. So from, the buyer all the way to the end customer seller, and then seeing the account going through the Linux Most botnet. However, we don't know what happened in the middle. Like, did it go through reseller panels or automation software accounts? That we don't know. And lastly, revenues. Well, back in 2016, when we investigated that, we concluded that it was a highly profitable industry. And we said that most of the profits we actually gave most of the profits to Linux Moves. So we sort of calculated how much alike was being sold on end customer sellers services and calculated how many fake likes and follows Linux Moves was doing on IoT, on the honeypots that we had, and we estimated that, for example, if Linux Moves had 40,000 infected devices, then it would make on average, let's say, $500,000, right? But we were wrong. Why? Because there's many other actors involved in the chain. So let's say, for example, that somebody buys 10,000 Instagram followers. Well, that person would pay $95 for 10,000 followers based on the median price that we calculated. Then the end customer seller would go to the reseller panel, from which it would buy at $22 for 10,000 followers. So we don't know how much Linux Moves is going to get, right? But we know that it's going to get much less than we expected first by giving all the profit margin of the revenue industry to Linux Moves. But we know that the cheapest reseller panel sells very cheap at $1.8 per 10,000 followers. Meanwhile, we have all these actors that are making money out of fake likes and following. So reseller panels, residential proxy services, and automation software. So if we say that you want to be trending, right? You buy 10,000 followers provided within a week. Each bot performed, we know on average 1,000 follows per month. So let's say that you want to have 2,000. So let's say that this means that you have to provide 2,000 follows per week. Then you would need 36 proxies at a median cost of $2 a month. So a flat cost of $72. That is quite a lot, considering that 10,000 followers is sold by end customer seller at $95. And this sort of explains why Linux Most exists, so why infected devices are being used to do that, or why guys like Valor Solution exist with its kind of shady operation with very cheap prices for IPv6 residential proxies. I'm going to pass this just because we're out of time, but basically what we have to remember from this analysis of revenue is basically that we gave all profit to Linux Most, and this is often what we do in the industry. We say that cybercrime is highly profitable, but we often forget all the actors that are involved within an industry that sort of make that industry flourish, right? And this is the mistake that we did in 2016, and this is sort of a message that we want to pull out today. So this sort of ends our ecosystem of social media manipulation with all the actors that we found through our investigation. There's other research avenues that we haven't looked at, so click farms, compromised accounts, and troll farms, which are different ways of creating fake likes and follows that do not go through IoT botnets. We also like to say what to do next. So for policymakers, we think that it'd be interesting to sort of replicate what the New York Attorney General did in the New York State to other countries, to other states in the United States and to other countries like Canada. For law enforcement, we believe that targeting the middleman could sort of disrupt the industry. When we say the middleman, we mean the reseller panels, but mainly the panel as a service provider, right? This guy or this person sort of enables many actors within the industry. So target these would be really interesting. And lastly, for social networks, continue to flag any robotic activity. So what we know right now is Instagram has enabled a new AI, and actors on Valor Discord server are really having a hard time sort of creating fake likes and follows. So the industry is being disrupted by that. So if we continue that tide, we'll sort of counter or at least fight the social media fraud industry. New will focus on the content rather than the container. So if somebody says, hey, look at that person, she or he has this amount of 1,000 followers, then ask yourself rather, what is this person bringing to society? Is this post legit, and what are the sources? And remember, fake follows or likes do not last. I had 8,000 followers on my fake account, and I ended up with 500 of them now. So it doesn't last because it's being flagged by Instagram. So it's a never-ending chase that you need to always go more and more. Well, thank you very much for this presentation. I'm sorry for being a little bit over time. There was a lot of content to go through. If you have any questions, don't hesitate to contact us.
Thank you, Olivier and Masara. Well done. That was definitely fascinating. As mentioned earlier, we will be sending the recorded version of the webinar to all attendees and registrants. We are out of time, so we will conclude this. If you are interested in learning more about GoSecure and our industry-leading managed detection and response capabilities, as well as our advisory services such as pen testing and security assessments, go to gosecure.net. Thank you and have a great day.